as well as through actions that can be undertaken by public agencies to expedite the payment of change orders. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present our views.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There's a, I guess you made a distinction between directives and change orders. And I understand, but if we take the context of a directive, that is where a GC is in a position to not only be aware of the condition, but also have directed the work to be performed, even though it's outside of the scope of the original contract. And is there to monitor time and materials that are used for those purposes. Once the work is completed and the subcontractor submits their proposed change order or their invoice for payment, what mechanisms exist to ensure that those change orders get paid?
Well, there are no mechanisms that I'm aware of to ensure that subcontractors will be paid. In fact, that's part of the problem.
Exactly.
Is that often owners batch all these change directives and do eventually into change orders at the end of the project and use that as a negotiating tool to knock the price down as much as possible for both the general contractor and subs performing changed work.
And I agree, and that's exactly why I asked the question, because there is no requirement. It is outside of the contract. It was work that wasn't necessarily contemplated, and so the need to create a framework for that work, because there are instances, and sometimes too many instances, where the change orders end up being a significant portion of the overall work that's performed on a contract. Sometimes the change orders are actually more than the actual original contract price itself, just because of the conditions, site conditions and the like, that are encountered when someone arrives on a site. So what would you suggest are viable mechanisms to require payment and that to ensure that payments are properly made in a broader context when work is done outside of a contract pursuant to either conditions on site, a directive, or a change order?
Well, I think, like, as I mentioned, I think one of the ways to do it is to require agencies to respond within a certain amount of time, or the contractor's proposal will be deemed approved. That'll cause agencies, I think, to respond timely in that regard. We actually drafted legislation a number of years ago that would provide that any public project where change orders are being issued, once you reach 10% of the contract value on change directives, something other than a formal change order, they could no longer issue change directives until they converted all the previous ones into billable change orders.
How did that work?
That was an attempt, which was unsuccessful, to get agencies to act on these change directives.
They will never, no one will ever, unfortunately, and I agree with you, advance legislation that is going to stop a job or potentially form the basis to stop a job. So the priority and the pressure is always on a job continuing, not having any lags, allowing the project to continue. We have to make sure that we get the project done. Correct. But on the other hand, I agree with you and with everyone else who's been here today. There has to be a mechanism. So whether it's a time period within which they have to answer, and if they agree, great. If they don't agree, give a specific rationale on why they are disagreeing. And then if there is an impasse where the subcontractor and the GC, or the GC and the owner disagree, there has to be a safety valve. There has to be, in my mind, an opportunity to seek recourse other than I'm paying you, so I'll tell you when I will pay you, which is, I think, the default in today's construction industry. Is if I'm paying you, I will tell you when I'm ready to pay you, and you wait. Is that?
Well, we would certainly support expedited arbitration for things like this. One of the problems with litigation for members of my organization is there are times when the change is not of an amount that makes litigation a reasonable approach. If you're a small sub, if you're a minority or women-owned business, and you got $10,000 or $15,000 change order that's not being paid, you're not going to litigate that. It's going to cost you more to litigate it than the money that's owed to you. So there's a problem with small changes as well. They know that you're not going to pursue, but if there was a mechanism to move these quickly to arbitration, far less cost, expedited, that could be an avenue for relief.
Yeah, no, I agree. And if there's an expedited method in arbitration, which there is, the AAA has in their construction industry standards, they do have expedited arbitration. And then if you're, if you put in a provision, I think, that allows the prevailing party their costs and fees, that could be a good incentive as well under those circumstances to ensure that you're not going to have frivolous arbitrations, but at the same time that it's handled
We wouldn't argue with that at
responsibly.
all. We would not argue with that approach at all.
No, I appreciate that. I just, I've heard and seen too many very difficult situations where, some very good contractors are no longer around as a result of, yes, downturns in the economy, but more often than not, those downturns in the economy coupled with, very difficult times getting paid for work that they already performed. And so, no, I appreciate that on all of these levels, not only change orders, how to address them, but also your comments on appropriate retainage. One of the comments that, and the issues that has come up, we passed legislation last year having to do with release of retainage from material suppliers, which was passed by both houses, yet vetoed. I'm sure you're aware of it.
I'm aware of it.
That veto was troubling because I thought we had taken some steps, and rather positive steps in my mind. And certainly if you have a thought on that, I'd love to hear it. But, the idea that somehow...
Philosophically, my organization has never been one that supports the withholding retainage, particularly on routine supplies delivered to a construction site. Our position is retainage is an inducement to performance.
Right.
Once a supplier has delivered a load of lumber to a construction site, he has performed. He's dropped it off, they've purchased it. There's no need to hold retainage on things like that. As far as more complicated things, we heard the arguments about, well, what about the carrier air conditioning unit on the top of the roof? We have to make sure it works. And we said, that's what warranties are for.
That's what warranties
retainage, in our mind, is an inducement during performance. It's not supposed to replace warranties on the project and be held as a separate warranty or guarantee for months or years after the project has been completed.
And if there's a specialty item, specially constructed truss system, specialty item, where there's a concern about the item itself, the retainage can be properly assessed for that item. But if you've got, like you said, lumber that's already in a project, again, my point is the subcontractor bears the cost of their suppliers.
Oh, sure.
And so they're not allowing for a 10% reduction, or else they're not going to continue to supply that job. So whether it's steel or concrete or any other material that's in that project, if you're not paying your material suppliers, they're not going to supply them, which is one more burden on subcontractors.
That's correct.
You have labor, you have your benefits, you have your material suppliers that are caught up in retainage, so you're holding retainage for materials that are already in the job. You're not going to be able to remove them. They've been accepted because you're building around it. We've gotten to a point where we have made it so difficult for contractors to continue to work in this state, and these
Interestingly,
bills make sense.
Retainage predates the Uniform Commercial Code. It predates surety bonds. It predates all sorts of guarantees that you commonly find in most construction agreements today. And that's why our organization believes that retainage as a whole is pretty much obsolete. It's an extra protection, not necessary in our minds. The federal government has gotten along very well for 30 years with a policy of zero retainage. Here in New York, DOT has held zero retainage for the last 10 years, and the sky hasn't fallen. So that's our position, is that retainage as a whole is not even particularly necessary anymore.
Well, if you have a performance bond, you certainly don't need it.
Right.
It's antiquated.
You certainly don't need it. Any questions?
No, I like the fact, I do like the fact that you gave us some specific
ideas of how to change the work order, the change order issue. Looks like a good piece of legislation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Dr. James Melius, Administrator of the New York State Laborers Tri-Funds. Doctor, welcome. Good to see you again.
Hi. Morning. Morning, yeah, just still morning. Senator Martins and Senator Savino. Not anymore. We
12:01.
do that. Anyway, I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you at today's hearing. We represent over 40,000 union construction workers in New York State. I can tell you I've been working for these organizations for over 20 years, and I think probably within the first month I was on the job, I got calls about complaints about late payments. So it's not a new issue. It's a significant issue that our union business managers and worry about, and that our contractors constantly battle with. And while I think there's been some progress over the years, it certainly is far from being solved as an issue. And as I'll talk a little bit at the end of my testimony, I think there's some changes in the industry that are tending to aggravate the problem right now for many of our contractors and subcontractors. I'll also add that it's an issue we've, as a union, have tried to stay out of it to some extent, because in the past, much of the legislation is focused either on the subcontractor side or the general contractor side, and we've tried to avoid getting in the middle between those two, favoring one or the other. So I'm glad to hear that, as people have talked earlier, that people are looking at it in a more comprehensive, global way rather than just focusing on one group or another with that. It is a significant issue. It's a significant issue we know for our contractors, both our small, even larger contractors we've had that have gone bankrupt or had significant problems in their ability to bid on new projects because of delays in payments on previous projects. In some reasons, when we've been asked to evaluate or investigate what's going on, or to assist one of our unions who's trying to help their contractor collect delayed payments, we found that there were sometimes the delays seem justified. In other cases, they seem totally arbitrary. That makes no sense why it either would take so long or why it should not been resolved at a much earlier stage, or it's simply an unexcusable bureaucratic delay. One other aspect that I'd like to add to this is from the union side is that, and I think this also applies on the non-union side also. They have some of the similar issues, though I'm more familiar on the union side. We have jointly trustee benefit funds, which are with our contractors. We work together. We are responsible for those. And those benefit funds have an obligation to collect money from our contractors whenever they employ our members. And so as much as we would like to be able to assist our contractors, give them extra time to pay the benefits if their payments are being delayed, we'd like to try to do so. However, it's limited. The U.S. Department of Labor enforces and regulates our benefit funds, and as well as other benefit funds. And if payments are delayed and you're not taking proper steps to either receive the money, collect the money, or from that contractor, then Department of Labor takes enforcement actions against the union trust fund. And so we have, in many cases, you're taking action against a contractor who you trust, you've worked with for many years, who you know is having problems through no fault of their own, but you're forced to take action and in some ways aggravate what's already a difficult problem for that contractor. And in the construction industry, this is already a problem for many contractors. It's a difficult industry, I think as you well know, Senator Martins, to survive in and to stay profitable in, and to have problems aggravated at every stage in terms of who you need to pay simply because a contractor, general contractor, an owner, or another party is not providing the payments in a timely fashion to you makes it much more difficult to do that. I've laid out, I'm not going to go repeat all my testimony, I've laid out some of the issues in terms of what the obligations are on the part of the trust funds. I think you referred to those earlier, but I think as you mentioned, Senator Martins, you have your payroll is enforced, so you have no choice in the Department of Labor that. You're also, in terms of payroll tax payments, that's enforced, and payments to your trust funds is also enforced. So the contractor who's getting delayed payments is being hit, cannot really afford to not pay their union members or their non-union members at all levels, both the payroll taxes, the trust fund, and the direct salary payments and that. What I would suggest in terms of reform is clearly what I think has been laid out in several of the pieces of legislation that have been mentioned here earlier that you've introduced, Senator Martins and Senator Savino did a number of years ago with those. I think that what we need is some way of providing an equitable and understandable system for doing that. Now, certainly arbitration is something that would assist in many cases, providing definite time frame for people being reimbursed that, or for some trying to resolve a particular problem. In preparing for this hearing, I called around to a number of our unions around the state just to get some examples, and everybody had an example. I'm not sure all the circumstances of those, but for example, one of our funds on Long Island has over five contractors currently owed over $1 million each for over 1 year in terms of trying to collect. And so that, again, carries over into the ability of the trust funds for that union to keep their members' benefits up, because it's a significant cost, and they have to maintain those. They want your members to have benefits, but they're feeling pressured, even though work is increasing for that union at the present time. So it's not a question of a bad economy. It's a question of particular entities not keeping up with payments to their contractors. Fortunately, we've not had trust funds, pension funds, or health and welfare funds go out of business because of that, but there are cases in other parts of the country with some of the trades where their funds have gone out of business because many of their contractors have lost so much work, no longer able to be competitive, and this is a significant problem. Two of the things I would just bring up, one was mentioned earlier, is the increasing use of design build, I think, does raise issues for how we handle these overall issues. And some of that is how the agencies, the owners, deal with design build, and in terms of their procedures. I'm not sure that the procedures in place and the training for the people overseeing these projects is sufficient to make the adjustments that are needed to oversee design build projects. I know that at least the outgoing Commissioner of Labor, Joan McDonald, spent a fair amount of time trying to bring her staff up to speed in terms of dealing with these types of procurements and in terms of being able to handle those efficiently. Secondly, we seem to be in a period of time when, while there's a lot of support for infrastructure development, for quote, quote, rebuilding our country and so forth, and lots of construction activity just based on an improving economy, we also seem to be in a time when there's public officials seem to be more and more concerned about the accountability and of those projects and how much money is being spent. We regularly hear on construction projects, particularly large construction projects in New York City, how they all go over budget and the agencies get blamed or whatever on that. But without, I think, adequate recognition how difficult it is to do construction in New York City, or for that matter, in other parts of the state, that how hard it is upfront to estimate the cost of a job, given the kinds of changes and circumstances that occur that you encounter as you're actually carrying out a large construction project. And I think we have to be careful that we don't use delays in payment to a contractor as a way of showing that the oversight agencies are doing their proper duty and so forth in oversight. They need to provide oversight. They also need to understand, have realistic understanding of what goes on within our industry. So let me close there. I again congratulate you on your work to address this issue. It's been neglected for a long time, and I'm very glad to see a sort of more comprehensive approach. And I think Senator Martins, you mentioned earlier, a construction payment day in the Senate and the Assembly would be nice to see, as well as a construction signing day in the governor's office.
That would be ideal.
Yeah.
I want to first of all thank you for being here, because oftentimes when we have these discussions regarding prompt pay, people forget that prompt pay saves jobs in a very real sense, for all of the reasons that we discussed. And if there is a general contractor or an owner on a job, everyone is interested in getting the job completed. But if a subcontractor goes out of business, that means all of those people lose their jobs. And so in a very real sense, it is the liquidity of payment, it is the ability to get paid for the work you've already performed that is so critically important. And again, the fact that we have to litigate the issue in the real sense, or even legislate the issue from a public policy standpoint, is troubling, because person does work, they should get paid, they in turn pay their workers who go home and support their families. And when one of those steps is broken, then the end result is that end step, that worker going home and supporting their families, is compromised. And whether it's in the sense of losing their job, whether it's in the sense of compromising their benefits for which they've worked, which is a portion of their wage, it is a real issue that we are unfortunately avoiding here in New York State. And I'm hopeful that with the help of Senator Savino and others, we'll able to bring it to the fore in the remaining weeks in this session. So it is very much a labor issue, and I thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doc. I just have one question, and I hadn't thought about this. So if the subs don't get paid, and they can't make the contributions to the union's welfare fund, which triggers a whole, enforcement action against the union, how do they make the payroll? How do the workers get paid, though? Does the union wind up having to lay out the wages?
At the union side, that enforcement takes place immediately. I mean, people are pulled off a job in most cases.
So they just don't work?
Yeah, they just don't work. I mean, or the Department of Labor is called, and Department of Labor is actually fairly prompt when called and dealing with non-payment issues of wages. And the tax department and IRS are pretty prompt in terms of following up if you don't make your payroll tax contributions. Now, there may be some delay, because depending on how you file and so forth, but they don't, and some delays in terms of catching up with a contractor or whatever, because work can be intermittent, but they're fairly prompt enforcement actions. I mean, we've had issues where workers have not been paid, usually when a contractor doesn't report those workers to the trust funds or to the union. So if they, which can happen, it's
well, certainly we want workers to get paid, but it's interesting. So if the subcontractor can go months and months without getting paid, and no one will do anything, but if the workers don't get paid, which, by the way, we want the workers to get paid, someone will do something about that immediately. We need to make sure we have the same approach on both ends. People should get paid. Work is work.
Yeah, and I'd say it's not just the subs.
Right.
The GCs too are often in the same boat. Though the
same urgency should apply at every step of the way.
Yeah, I think the subs are sort of at the end of the chain there, unfortunately, for them and for the people that work for them, because they're an important part of the industry.
99 times out of 100, you have 500 people sitting on a job site putting up a building. 490 of them are employees of a subcontractor.
Yeah.
And so let's deal with the issue where it belongs. And if the payments aren't made, let's talk about that. The owner, public owner especially, they have no skin in the game.
Yeah.
Okay. GC has some skin in the game. Obviously, they have risk. It's contractual risk. Subcontractor, they don't get paid. They don't pay their workers. They don't pay the benefits. It's personal liability. Either they're going to get a claim from the union under ERISA, which is against the owners of the subcontractor personally, or they're going to get a visit from the Labor Department and an enforcement action for payment of wages, which is against them, again, personally. There is no corporate shield when it comes to wages or benefits, either under the labor law or under ERISA. So who bears the significant risk on this is the subcontractor, specifically their ownership specifically. And it's absolutely bizarre that we're even having this conversation and we have to go through this. That's why these laws are critically important.
I agree.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank
Wonderful.
you.
So with that, I want to thank everyone for participating today. As I said, we have written testimony that we will either be receiving or we have already received from the various entities, whether it's Dormitory Authority, School Construction Authority, the University Fund here in New York State. As we receive it, we will also make it public and available to everyone who participated today and to the members of the committee. And hopefully this is a nudge to my colleagues in the Senate and the Assembly and to the governor to get something done this session. Thank you very much.